ditch gendered terms like son, daughter, among other offensive terms they apparently need to avoid.
According to the judge, the LNG pause was in part, quotes, completely without reason or logic.
I'm not a flat earther. I'm not a round earther. Actually, what I am somebody who has left the cult of science.
I think I just got gay bashed for the first time in 19 years of living in Los Angeles.
The woke speech police are back on their BS. Biden takes another L in court. Candace Owens flirts with flat earth theories, and another TikToker fakes a hate crime. All this and so much more is coming up on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I take on the craziest ideas from across the internet and across our politics from a center-right, independent perspective. If you're new here, please consider subscribing and sticking around. And if you're a returning viewer, you know what I'm about to say. Hit that like button and do comment with your thoughts as we go along. I do read the comments and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. First, a programming announcement. There will be no show tomorrow because of the 4th, and also no show on Friday because I will be traveling to attend a wedding. So have a great holiday and try not to miss me too much. Now for our first story. Today is a day that ends in Y, so we've got woke insanity coming out of the Biden administration. A new investigative report from the Daily Wire shows that the Department of Interior has issued another inclusive language guide telling their bureaucrats to ditch gendered terms like son, daughter, among other offensive terms they apparently need to avoid in internal communications. Can we talk about the term language guide for a second? It's kind of crazy that institutions or organizations even need to do that. I mean, it's different from a style guide where you're saying like, okay, here's the terms that we use for a publication. Here's what we capitalize. Here's how we spell things. Like, that's a little different, but to have a language guide, what words are no-nos and what words are good, right speak is just a little touch of Orwellian, just a little bit. Anyway, let's get into the reporting from Spencer Lindquist. The Department of Interior published a guide to inclusive language exclusively obtained by the Daily Wire that tells bureaucrats to avoid gendered terms like husband, son, and daughter, and even instructs them to use they-them pronouns for individuals rather than assume someone's gender. Really? We're back on this bullshit again? It's just a priorities thing to me. We have so many problems as a country, and yet our federal agencies are spending our tax dollars and their time as our employees huddling together and coming up with language guides that address absurd, non-existent microaggressions or something. More details here from the report. The 24-page document, called the U.S. Department of the Interior Inclusive Language Guide and published this month for official use only, details what terms bureaucrats should use or avoid when discussing gender and sexuality. The guide includes a list of 104 different terms that the Interior recommends bureaucrats replace with alternate, approved words. Husband and wife, for example, should be replaced with spouse, partner, significant other, the federal agency says. Daughter and son should also be replaced with child or kid, according to the guide, which even asks bureaucrats to replace cockpit with flight deck. Again, the cockpit thing, guys, it doesn't have anything to do with gender or genitalia. And this is all so absurd. Nobody in the real world is offended by any of these terms. So these people are hopelessly out of touch with the public they're supposed to be serving. And even if you do accept that non-binary or gender fluid or whatever is legit, which, to be clear, I don't. Why do we have to reconstruct our entire language around niche outlier exceptions? If someone has a non-binary partner or spouse, you could use that language applied to them, but still generically refer to a husband or a wife in generic situations because that's the case, and that's true 99.9999999% of the time. Using general language that everyone uses that doesn't account for a rare exception doesn't harm anyone. It doesn't harm those people in any material way. But these kinds of woke ideologues are obsessed with language over actual change or progress or reality. Another section of the guide asks bureaucrats to use, quote, identity-first language, such as substituting blind person and amputee with a person who is blind and a child with an amputation. They go even further down this path of person-first language. Under terms to avoid, they have victim and survivor, and instead they suggest she has experienced and he has been impacted by. They also have wheelchair bound, and instead they use a wheelchair. And they have mentally ill, and instead they have he is a person with a mental illness. Abusive relationship is apparently a no-go. You're supposed to say they are a person who is abusive. Addict is apparently verboten. You should say he has a substance use disorder. Homeless person is, of course, deeply offensive and problematic. You're supposed to say she is without housing. I find this linguistic project incredibly dumb. Calling a homeless person instead of a person without housing or whatever means the exact same thing. There is no difference whatsoever. And changing what you call them does literally nothing to actually help them or address the root problem of homelessness. It is 100% virtue signal and 0% virtue. And if the issue is that there's stigma attached to the original term, like addict, for example, well, whatever you replace it with, person with a substance use disorder or whatever, is just going to eventually, the stigma will shift to that. You're accomplishing nothing again. Now look, at the end of the day, this story isn't that significant. I acknowledge that. I'm not going to be kept up at night over what terms the Department of Interior uses in their internal communications. But the reason that this story does matter is that it's more evidence of ideological capture of our federal agencies. Only a regulatory agency that is truly dominated by extreme progressive ideologues would ever even think to suggest such a project like this and then, by any means, not have it laughed out of the room immediately. And that is a problem. It is a problem to have our federal agencies, which are increasingly and ever more powerful and have more influence and control over our lives, dominated by extremists who are totally out of touch with the American public. Unlike all the minor little microaggressions these people are all worked up about, that actually is a problem facing our society. But that's just my take. You'll have to let me know what you think in the comments below. And now, the president just took yet another L in court. A few months back, the Biden administration announced a pause or a freeze on future permits and approvals for exporting projects of liquid natural gas. Basically, current export projects underway that have been approved could still go forward, but the approval process for future projects to export natural gas outside to other countries as an energy source from the American energy industry are paused. They're frozen. There wouldn't be any more approvals under this policy. Well, unsurprisingly, this big move was challenged in court, and it did not go well for the Biden administration. We just got an update this week. Here's an update from the news outlet KALB.
A federal judge reversed the Biden administration's freeze on all new LNG export approvals. According to the judge, the LNG pause was in part, quotes, completely without reason or logic. Senator Cassidy says this judge's ruling comes as a big win for Louisiana across the board.
Imagine the permanent jobs that are going to come afterwards. Imagine all the pipelines and all the natural gas exploration being done to get the gas there in the first place. That benefits our economy up and down. By the way, it benefits us another way. It benefits us in that if countries elsewhere are buying our natural gas, they're sending their money to us, and that helps our whole country's economy. If they are burning our natural gas instead of their coal or Russia's natural gas and they pollute all over the place, then it's also good for the environment.
So I can't really speak to the legal element here, but I am glad to see this policy not going into place because it is one of the dumbest and most counterproductive moves the Biden administration has made. It was just a blatant pander to the climate activist and Gen Z voters who are obsessed with Greta Thunberg.
How dare you!
That not only has significant economic costs in terms of lost economic activity and income and jobs and projects, but is actually a net negative for the environment and even the climate if you think through the consequences for more than 5 seconds. Yes, natural gas involves carbon emissions, but it involves significantly less carbon emissions than other forms of energy like burning coal, which is what some some of the countries that would have purchased our natural gas will switch to instead. Or they'll just buy liquid natural gas, but they'll buy it from our enemies. They'll buy it from Russia instead. And newsflash, folks, Russian companies tend to pollute a little bit more and not be quite so environmentally concerned as American companies. So no matter how you slice it, it's a loss for the economy and the environment, and the only benefit is to pander to climate activists or Gen Z people who think it's a win when it's actually not. And guys, you don't just have to take my word about it. This policy was so dumb that even the editorial board of the quite liberal Washington Post slammed Biden for it. The main short-run damage the administration's obviously political decision does is to the United States' reputation for rational, fact-based policymaking and for wise consideration of climate control in the context of geopolitics, the board wrote. They went on to make the point that I just made. You cannot change demand for energy by destroying supply. They wrote, if the United States did indeed curtail liquid natural gas exports, it would just drive customers into the arms of competitors such as Australia, Qatar, Algeria, and yes, Russia. Quite possibly, some potential customers would choose to meet their needs with coal instead. Biden, babe, when you've lost the Washington Post, you might be doing something wrong. The whole thing is ridiculous, and I am glad to see it not going into place. But you let me know what you think in the comments below. And now we're going to talk about dear friend of the show, Candace Owens, who still has me blocked on Twitter, because the right-wing commentator is now openly flirting with flat earth conspiracy theories. To be clear, she hasn't gone all in on flat earth, but she's now describing herself at the very least as somebody who isn't a round earther. Take a listen to this clip from her show.
Guys, imagine being married to me. I mean, my poor husband, he rolls over. He's like, what are you reading? And I feel like a regular wife says something, I don't know, maybe a love series, Nora Roberts, sweeping her away. Me, on the other hand, he rolled over, he asked me, and I said, oh, I'm reading a flat earth theory. And it dawned into an entire conversation. He's like, why are you reading a flat earth theory? And I'm like, because somebody messaged me on Manect about it and they included some links and I'm just reading them. I don't know. I'm just an interested person. No matter what, if there's a bunch of people that believe something, I now want to know what it is that they believe. And of course, he pushed me on this and he was talking about the earth curvature and science. And I said to him, listen, I'm not a flat earther. I'm not a round earther. Actually, what I am is I am somebody who has left the cult of science. I have left the mega church of science because what I have now realized is that science, what it is actually, if you think about it, is a pagan faith.
Candace, babe, your Delulu is showing. Honestly, guys, this is the right-wing equivalent of what I often talk about with woke people. It's good to be open-minded, but if you're too open-minded, your brain can fall out. The earth is not flat. And while I share Candace's desire to understand what people believe when some people believe something, I do share that, and that it does apply to flat earthers. The fact that she's at least partially buying into it, saying, I don't know if the earth is round, I'm not a round earther, is really concerning to me. The fact that she's even entertaining such a ludicrous and fact-free conspiracy theory, honestly, shows how gullible she is. I mean, people have extensively observed and documented the curvature of the earth, both from the air, from planes really high up, from mountaintops, from really high points of elevation, and even from space. And regardless, even without any of that, without confirmation and in ways we can see, so much of our science that we know, our understandings of physics, doesn't make any sense or work on a flat earth. But we can observe and confirm that it does work exactly the way you would expect on a round earth. Regardless, when we're talking about conspiracy theories, in terms of flat earth, there's no motivation that would possibly motivate people to have a vast conspiracy to lie about the shape of the earth. There's no motivation to do that. And the sheer number of people that would have to be in cahoots and keep it all under wraps to fake all of this stuff is astronomical, to the point that it makes it totally implausible, to the point of being laughable, at least to anybody who critically thinks about this for more than a few seconds. And the fact that Candace seriously entertains this nonsense is a red flag to her credibility. Now, I do understand to some extent why folks, including Candace, have lost faith in the scientific establishment, in the experts. I mean, how could anybody not have lost some faith in those people after the disastrous couple of years of COVID, when they were calling things conspiracies that turned out to be true, when they were knowingly misleading the public? I get that. I get being more skeptical and not just blindly deferring to experts and Dr. Fauci and all these types. I really do. I understand why people lost faith. But science itself is not a pagan cult, Candace. Science is a process of discovery by which we have learned tremendous amounts about the world and made unimaginable progress in the human condition. The problem is when things are presented as science that are actually agenda-driven or politically motivated. But the problem there is the distortion of science, not science itself. Again, it's valid to have lost some trust in the experts and in scientific institutions and to worry that they've been ideologically corrupted. But if you flip to the opposite extreme, and you suddenly start believing that everything scientists say and believe is wrong and untrue, to the point where you are actually entertaining the idea that the earth is flat, then babe, you're engaging in the exact same type of black and white absolutist thinking that the people engaged in when they put on their cloth masks and bought bobbleheads of Dr. Fauci. That's just my honest critique of Candace Owens' latest viral moment, but you'll have to let me know what you think in the comments and if you somehow buy into the flat earth conspiracy stuff. And now it's time for Brad versus TikTok, my segment where I take on the craziest ideas from the Clock app.
Pronoun of the day is slug.
Make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet, and don't forget to hit that like button to reward me for suffering through stupidity and losing brain cells for your viewing pleasure. Now today, we've got a TikToker who is going to tell us about the gay bashing that he recently supposedly experienced, but you will notice one thing missing from his story: a gay bashing. Let's take a look and hear him out.
I'm hopping on here. I think I just got gay bashed for the first time in 19 years of living in Los Angeles.
In LA?
I was just here at the Sprouts in Culver City, and I was walking near the deli section, and this older guy said, "Don't get too close. I'm not gay." 19 years, I've never had that happen here. And
wait, that's it?
And it's Pride Month, the end of Pride Month. So there's that. This fight is not over. And this sucks. But do better.
My dude, is the victim of this gay bashing in the room with us? Because I'm not seeing one. I'm not seeing the bruises, the cuts, the scrapes, the scratches, the black eyes. You can't have actually come up here on TikTok and with your full chest described one sentence a man said to you at a grocery store as a gay bashing. First off, we don't really know what happened and if it was even homophobic, but let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say someone said one homophobic, rude sentence to you. That is not a gay bashing. And that is so insulting to all the people, including many still with us today, including some older guys that I know and really have a lot of admiration for, who were literally beat up for being gay, who were pummeled, who were left with bruises, who had broken bones, for goodness sake. And you're comparing somebody saying something that you might have misinterpreted or you might have done something to cause, but maybe it was just a genuinely rude and homophobic remark. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. You're calling that a gay bashing? That is so insulting and ridiculous. You're essentially declaring yourself a victim of a hate crime where none occurred. Now, why is this happening? Why do we see this kind of thing? I've covered it before. Why do we see with some regularity online personalities claiming to be victims of hate crimes when they were not, in fact, victims of hate crimes? It's a pretty strange thing at first glance. But when you think about it at a little bit of a deeper level, it makes more sense where this perverse, fake, disgusting, wannabe victimhood, cosplaying, as a marginalized person who's being traumatized or whatever, where that comes from actually makes sense when you think about it a little bit deeply on a bigger picture level. Part of it is just the internet and just people wanting to get attention and get noticed. So this like click-based culture, it's even true for me. I want my videos to get seen and get noticed. Now, I'm not willing to lie or totally misrepresent things to do it, but that is a thing that internet culture exerts on people who create content, and it does at least incentivize them to exaggerate or fake things like this. But the second part of it is also kind of the woke perspective, the woke culture online in the spaces that a gay content creator would occupy. Because in those spaces, in those social justice warrior type ecosystems, they have essentially made victimhood a form of social currency. And when you do that, you are of course going to incentivize counterfeiters, which is exactly what this guy is. Somebody seeking attention, somebody seeking victim points, who is willing to insult actual victims by falsely portraying himself as the victim of a hate crime when he wasn't. That is a really reprehensible thing for an individual to do, if you ask me. I really do believe that. But at the same time, it's not just an individual bad decision. It's the product of a broken and dysfunctional social culture online and in progressive spaces. And until something there changes, until a dam breaks in that bizarre ecosystem and world, we're going to keep seeing these kinds of influencers engaging in this absurd, performative, fraudulent self-victimization. You let me know what you think in the comments below. Does his experience count as a gay bashing? I want to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that like button, because I did lose brain cells, honestly, even entertaining that nonsense. So you should reward me for my suffering. And now, before we wrap up today's episode, I'll read a couple of your comments you left on yesterday's show. One person writes, "I remember net neutrality was a real fear for me and everyone online back then. I never really understood it, but eventually people stopped talking about it, so I assumed nothing happened. It wasn't until this year I realized that I was lied to. Even my Trump-supporting friend was worried about this." Yeah, I don't blame you for being worried about it. You had major political figures, but more importantly, like all the media outlets, the New York Times, CNN, everything telling you this was the end of the internet as we know it. So if you're just an everyday person, I understand why you would believe it. I don't blame you for getting that wrong. They're the ones who either through vast ignorance and having just drunk so much propaganda and Kool-Aid, or through malice, through lies, they wanted to preserve a policy, they wanted to be anti-Trump and resist or whatever, spread totally false, doomsday, apocalyptic rhetoric with no basis in reality about the repeal of net neutrality. So I want to be clear, I totally get why people fell for it. It's not really your fault. It's the fault of the mainstream media and other institutions that spread fear porn and lied to you, either intentionally or through neglect. It's really their fault. Another person says, "Man, the Greta how dare you meme has got to be my favorite. So much dramatic emotion."
How dare you?
Sir, that is very offensive. You are talking about an icon of our times, a stunning and brave genius. I am deeply, deeply offended on Greta's behalf, and you, sir, are canceled for daring to make fun of or laugh at her in any way. Another person says, "When you aren't researching topics or keeping an eye on the political world, what do you do to relax, to shut your mind from the chaos for a bit?" That's a great question. I do a couple different things. One is just spending time with my boyfriend or my dog, just turn my phone off for a few hours, go for a long walk, go out to dinner, that kind of thing. I also do a lot of sports, so I play in a soccer league. I play some very casual volleyball, and I also watch and follow soccer very closely, professional soccer, particularly Chelsea, and that's probably my biggest hobby, if you will. Another person says, "Brad, I hope you could give your opinion about the Austin Wolf situation." So I'm not even going to say what that situation is for context, because it would probably get this video demonetized. But I mean, as far as I can see, there's really not that much to say about it. Like, lock him up and throw away the key if what he's accused of is true. Everybody deserves their day in court, but it looks pretty damning. I mean, yeah, I had no idea who he was, never heard of him. I don't follow that particular space very closely. Sounds like people knew about him for a while, which is really gross, but that is the way these industries work. And yeah, lock them up and throw away the key. All right, everybody, that is it for this video. Thanks so much for tuning in and joining me on this episode of Brad versus Everyone. Make sure you're subscribed. Don't forget to like, comment, yada, yada, yah, and we'll talk again next week.